So, well, what we wanted to do first was do a bit of looking back before we look forward. And so obviously we're celebrating 20 years of being in business. You're over 20 years, aren't you?
23.
Is Mecca?
23.
23.
But don't you think that once you get to 20, it's a rounding error? I think getting to 20
So
it's a celebration.
Score.
So well done.
So thank you very much indeed. But looking back, what do you tell us how you think your market and your environment has changed in 20 years? Well, I mean, when you think back to what it was like 20 years ago, what's changed? What are the biggest changes?
So I'm going to say, for me, the biggest change is that you've gone from transactional retail, where it was all about the real estate and having the product there for the customer, through to lip service about putting the customer first, through to the customer wrestling control through digital and all of the platforms that go with that. And so now, for the first time in 20 years, it is as it should be. The customer is king and queen. They do control both the interaction, the conversation, and the outcome. Yeah. And it is as it should be.
So Pete, what's the impact of that, and what has the impact of that been on the business and the way you structure the business?
Well, I think on many ways, it means that we have to be way more digital and customer experience centric than we were probably in the early days. And when you've got, when you're delivering your customer experience mainly in stores, you can go to a store and you can see the experience. But in the digital world, you can no longer see it. You have to experience it in different ways, because actually often it's personalized and it's done through a channel which is invisible unless you go in and experience the same set of clicks and the same stream of activities. And I think there is a massive shift now in terms of how you run a retail business to try and integrate what was that traditional model with that digital model, which is a different set of skills. And how do you blend the art of the old retail and the customer service experience and the human interaction with the new retail experience, which is about tech and personalization and virtual interactions, and put that together in a way that is unique for the customer.
I believe that the Future Laboratory actually coined the phrase phygital, which talks to exactly what Peter is referring to.
To do it. I mean, it's interesting that if I think about what's happened in the UK, that great understanding that COVID has just accelerated incoming changes. So, you have that kind of sense that if it wouldn't have happened, it would have happened rather over time, but now it's compressed. So we're seeing changes done swiftly. People who are less familiar with the internet are now using it every day, and there's the bar to, I guess, usage and familiarity is now gone. We're now understanding its service, as somebody described to me recently, it's about speed of delivery. I said, oh, that's interesting. So they're seeing it as speed and choice, and they're seeing it as being able to get things back and forward really at an efficient rate. One thing that I'd say to me, what is it you miss? And they bring up the notion of experience, and I go, okay, so what would you like to see when you get back into the store? And what I thought was more interesting, now that they accept the product is a given and the speed of delivery is a given and the choice of speed of delivery is a given, they said, we wanted to have a chat with people. We wanted just a bit of human contact. And I thought it was interesting that the last 10 years, we've avoided human contact in stores because it's inefficient, and we just wanted to get in and get out and get the product into our bag or whatever. So have you had thoughts about how potentially when everything reopens again, and I know that you are one of the few retailers, and in fact, I would say this globally, that majors on in-store experience. Have you now rethought or worked out how that will change after COVID?
I think we're going to, first of all, double down on what is our DNA, is our raison d'etre, is our what we call the Mecca moat. And that is that during COVID, we launched Meccaversity, which is an online education platform, and all of our team members who are unable to work in store actually enrolled in Meccaversity, Ditto week, chose their major, chose their minor, and the level of education that our team has undertaken during COVID is unparalleled globally. So the first thing is we have a team who is now educated and has majors in skincare, color, fragrance, but also things like leadership and many other topics, so that when they get back into store, they can engage with the customer, bring the customer up the learning curve immediately, personalize the plethora of products to that customer. And that to me is what Mecca has always done, but I think we've just doubled down in terms of how we, ameliorate that experience during it's a silver lining of COVID for us that we've been able to do that. But a second thing, and something, when you talk about this human contact, something that we've spoken about a lot, because of COVID, we have relied more on digital. And as a result of that, another silver lining is that we've been able to access experts, brand founders, for example, globally, and beam them into customers' homes in Australia. So for us, we go, if we take the Mecca team member experience and we take the fact that we've been able to get our customers used to this, accessing global talent, how about we then find a way in store to beam these global experts into store and then provide the human connection through the Mecca Beauty Lab, where 8 to 10 people sit in a horseshoe, look at the screen, have a live experience with a global expert, and then they get the human contact from each other around the horseshoe and from Mecca team members. And so we've already started doing that. And the response when I say we've already started doing that. So basically, if I was to summarize so that you don't have to go and listen to all of that, I would say we are, 1, going to take the expertise of the in-store team, 2, take the acceptance of globalized content that has come as a result of COVID and bring that to the in-store experience. And the human connection will come from your fellow beauty enthusiast sitting next to you at a Mecca Beauty Lab, and it will be facilitated by team members.
Brilliant.
So it's a new way of consuming beauty. It's like YouTube, but you have the product in front of you and you have team members around you. You have customers around you.
Yeah. In some ways, it's proper phygital, because I always think the big default for a lot of businesses was to put a screen, as or an iPad in a store and hope that was an attempt to go into the 21st century. And you realize they just sat around the store getting fingerprints and were rather grubby and unhygienic and never updated. So you could never work them. So I think the exactly having those moments, but I also think the thing of tutorials, learning, because that was one of the other things that came out of when you go back, what is it you're going to be looking for? Because now weirdly, the ability to order online frees up time, and what you probably will be gaining in store is more personalized opportunities as a retailer, more ways to, as somebody said, to find out about your customer side on rather than face on. So it's almost you're chatting to them rather than chatting at them. And I think that ability that you will have, which technology will, I think, facilitate, but also the limitation, because for the next 6 months to a year, we're still going to be in and out of the COVID situation. I think it allows a lot of retailers to relook at, as you have done, look at how this relationship moves forward, because we go back to this thing about the new normal. And my question is, why do you want to go to the normal at all? Why do we want to go back to normal? Surely we should be looking at the new extraordinary. So what is the extraordinary thing that will make this different? And, if you had shitty service before, indifferent staff, rubbish kind of experiences, well, let's go back to that again. That's a really good solution for retailers, isn't it? I mean, when I heard a British retailer saying that, I thought, oh my God, you are absolutely fit. This was Marks and Spencer's. We're looking forward with our customers to going back to the new normal. So what dull, wall-to-wall, empty fashion aisles full of fat people who can't speak and wearing mauve. Come on, that's really the answer.
Excuse me. Wearing mauve.
That's not mauve, sorry.
Excuse me, I love that. By the way, if you don't mind, I'm going to lift that. You're not talking to people, you're talking alongside them. I think that is actually a beautiful, that paints the picture of the way forward.
Yeah.
That it truly is, you walk the path of experience together.
Yeah, you're looking at the same horizon. That's the trick. It's like restaurants. When you look at each other in a restaurant, you're looking at people behind you. When you sit side by side, you're all looking at the same thing, which means you've shared conversation.
So let's talk about that horizon. I've got a question for Pete. In terms of now maybe starting to look forward, how do you think the Australian psyche has been affected by the coronavirus pandemic? And do you think it's going to have a substantial impact on the way that they look at not just consumption, but maybe a wider question around elements of society in terms of how you work and how you interact? Do you think you're going to come out of this?
There's a few things in that. Firstly, the Australian psyche probably has to be split between two different groups. One of them is the group that lived in Victoria through the second wave, and the whole of the rest of Australia that actually hasn't had a second wave. Yeah. And so there is a real dichotomy between what has happened in Victoria, where we reached a peak of 720 cases a day, and where we have been in lockdown now for, I guess it's nearly 7 months, and different levels. But right now, we're not allowed to outside of the house for more than 2 hours. We aren't, in a situation where any of the discretionary retail is open. We can't go to any restaurants. We can't go to any bars. There is no nightlife. There is no entertainment. We're not allowed to move more than 5 kilometers from our homes. And unless we're classified as an essential worker, we can't actually go to the office. So it is incredibly, it's the most sort of, I don't know what's the right word, repressive lockdown in the world is probably the correct term. And then the rest of Australia didn't have the second wave and has actually been quite happily living life almost as normal, except that they've got a few more hand sanitizers around than they used to. And so it's incredibly different. If you live in Victoria, there is this sort of crawling up the walls thing going on, particularly for people who live in a small, house. And if they live by themselves, it's been incredibly, I think, mentally challenging for people to go months after month of a basically solitary life. Whereas outside of, Victoria, it's actually relatively normal. I think in terms of the Australian psyche, the other thing is our borders are closed. We can't go outside of Australia any longer. If you think about one of the defining things about the Australian psyche is its travel. I don't know what the statistics would say, but it must be one of the most traveled population in the world. It's a rite of passage for Australian youth to go and spend their time cavorting around Europe or, traveling around far-flung bits of Asia and so on. And it's just stopped. They can't do it. And so, what's happening is there's a great shift in consumer behavior where all that money that would have been spent on going overseas and going, to experience different things, in life has all basically been repatriated into the Australian economy. And so there's this huge nesting phenomenon, which I think isn't just in Australia, but people are spending so much on their houses because they're saying like, geez, I'm not going to spend all this time here. That's where I'm going to invest my money to at least make it feel like a decent place to live. So there's a massive shift towards different sorts of spending. I think people are spending on wellness and little treats. And then there is, an element to which they're all going, okay, well, if we can't go overseas any longer, let's work out where we're going to buy a weekender to go and spend time outside of the city. And so places like Byron Bay, real estate's going through the roof. There are a whole load of shifts going on, which, you could look at them and go, well, why are people buying places in Byron Bay if this is a one-year thing? And I think people are looking at it going, it's not a one-year thing. This is, we Australians will not travel, they're now saying, for the whole of 2021. So,
it's what government is saying.
The government is saying. And Qantas is basically shut.
For 3 years.
From an international point of view, for 3 years. So it's there is a massive shift going on. Office work is obviously not happening in the CBDs. And there is a real question now about will people settle for going back to work in the CBDs? Now they've got used to the notion of they can live outside of town by an hour or two, or even up in Byron Bay, work remotely, and it sort of works. So, real estate, massive shifts, big changes in the structure of the way society operates.
Do you think, because we're looking at, in fact, here, a similar question has arisen with big property developers. So people like Stanhope and, British Land, etc. And they're saying, look, people will come back. And I guess the same with CBDs, but they will now negotiate the way they return, and they will understand that, where offices used to be about a desk and working from that desk, we now know, for example, that we can do a lot of this work remotely. So we're going to use the office or equivalent in a different way. So we might be there 3 days out of 5 days, or 2 days out of 5 days. So this will be part of our negotiated contracts. And one of the things that people are saying, well, how do CBDs look at businesses? And then does the role of retail alter? And the way we if you think about what's happened over the past decade, we've really built retail into the model of CBD to make CBD more interesting, because really it was just offices and then maybe a couple of bars, but essentially you left in the evening. Now, certainly in London, they've extended the time you would stay in CBD by putting in more retail, more hospitality, more beauty, wellness, gym. So all of these things are being built in on the presumption that we will be using them. Office. Yeah. And if this doesn't happen, what do you, because I'm thinking about the beauty industry and wellness. We just did a project recently where the focus had gone from commercial retail to they were really banking and betting on beauty, wellness, well-being and health as being the anchors of the new city post-COVID. So they said it's interesting that those areas that used to be seen as they sat as an added value become a core asset. So do you see this happening in Australia? And if so, how would you see your business developing if suddenly there is a greater focus on areas that are about the body and improvement and holistic pampering, well-being. I guess holistic well-being?
That's a big question.
That's what I thought I'd ask you to.
So if we split that question into if I'm right, what's the role of the CBD versus suburban for retail and specifically beauty, and then what's the role for wellness in the beauty landscape? Is that so
it's more the extension, those areas that we're seen to be kind of in addition to that core retail like clothing and things, but now it's now the things that you do are beginning to be more important.
Front and center.
Front and center, where previously they weren't sitting in that position.
So, well, I think that beauty and wellness was already emerging as the next really important segment in retail pre-COVID. So I would say that first off. Then I would say, in terms of where do we see retail settling in terms of location, sort of city versus regionally? going forward. I think that the jury is still out, actually, honestly, and something we're still working through, because on the one hand, there's no question that our Mecca, our Mecca high street stores were busier during COVID, will be busier going forward. Customers will feel much more comfortable shopping locally, having that connection locally. I think they'll really enjoy that. They'll enjoy knowing the manager. And so I think there's no question that there will be this real sort of resurgence of localized suburban and regional shopping. So absolutely, tick, 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 tick. That said, if we go back to experience and what experience can offer and people wanting experience, I think that if I think about Mecca, where are we going to put all of our energy and effort into providing a huge experience? And so, for example, we're launching our new flagship store in Sydney, and it's 3 stories. It's 15,000 square meters. It's got about 1,500 square meters, sorry. It's got about 15,000 sounds great. It's got, about 30% of the floor spaces towards experiences. So there's beauty labs, skin labs, there's perfumerias, there's skin spaces, we've got naturopaths, we've got kinesiologists, we've got, we've got all these different services throughout the space. And would we ever be able to provide that sort of experience and service in a small regional store? No. So I think that it's going to sort of split the experience into, I just want that lovely local experience where I feel safe, I feel comfortable, I know the team member, and it is my local. And then there's going to be this, I think, over time, almost sort of complete 180 to, I want excitement, I want new experiences, I want to experience things differently. And that's going to be where people naturally coalesce. And I think that is going to continue to be the CBD.
Interestingly, when I was talking to Chanel last week and they were asking me about some of these changes, I was saying, get ready again for that shopper who comes to your shop with the specific intention of spending 2 or 3 times a year, and that's it. That they're not going to casually drop in maybe in the way that they used to do because they were going into the CBD or they were going into that shopping area regularly. It now becomes a special trip again. And so they're coming in for that seasonal visit, and they're expecting to see new, they're expecting to see a new collection, something different, and not on quite the same regularity, but they're also going to expect therefore to be recognized when they turn up, because they're here to spend and they're here for a very specific reason, which is to engage with the brand and probably shop deep. And so I think you're
absolutely right. And interestingly, even during COVID, if you look at the conversion rates, there's less traffic coming into store, but the people who are coming into store are buying. So there is
spending more.
And spending more. So to your point, browsing is no longer a past.
So just one more question before maybe we turn the tables and allow you to ask us a question. And it was just, again, looking at the change of the landscape, but I wondered about to just going back to where we were talking before about how internally, we start to think the impacts are going to be on our businesses in terms of, we've talked about the consumer, but what about our teams? Moving forward, how do you think you're going to have to restructure your organization to cope with the demands of a changed workforce? What are you already anticipating as you come out of lockdown?
Whoa, tough question. That's a good one.
You know what? It's interesting because we're about to expand our office here in Melbourne, and
the only people in the world.
And as we've gone through that process, we've kind of gone, you know what, we are not planning for radical change. We are planning that actually there will be a level to which people want to get back into workplaces to work, who they're fed up with distractions at home and competing with other family members for space and desks and dealing with children who are at home and all the rest of it.
And can I just dive in one thing? I'm just going to say, from a creativity point of view, I still believe that having people in the same room to think, brainstorm creatively is critical. And you just don't get the same outcomes on Zoom. Sorry, back to you.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, whatever Zoom, supposed collaboration methods there are, I don't think they are a pale shadow even of what it is when you're in a room together, around some whiteboards with some sticky notes and so on. So, so our office design isn't fundamentally going to be that different, but I think there are a couple of differences. One of them is we're going to try and make the spaces more collaborative and agile than they were before, so that if you are going to be in the office, the fundamental purpose of collaboration is brought to the surface more.
Yeah.
And then the other element is just there probably will be an expectation of more flexible working, so not everyone in all the time. And how that plans out in terms of number of desks that you might be able to fit in with people hot desk a bit more, we haven't figured out yet. But I think that's a likelihood that we will probably be more space intensive in the long run than we used to be. So but it's hard to know exactly how that will work, because for everyone you've got up and wants to now work remotely from Byron all the time, you've got someone else who's been cooped up with young children in their place and just can't wait to get back to the office where they can actually do work.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, I mean, Joe, what I will do is I will send you, because I'm about to do a piece on it, is if we don't need to go to the office to occupy a desk, what is it we need to go for? And obviously culture is a key thing, because culture needs to be passed on, not dictated to. Second is productivity. While general productivity has gone up from people working from home, from early research, general creative productivity has gone the opposite. The third bit is, and I'll send you the piece when it's done, because I think we've had this debate with clients, and it will become an increasing reason with your teams. Why would I want to come back? The third thing is the notion of what they call the tangible and intangible network. So if you're thinking about your career, if you're thinking about your diversity and inclusion, your ability to improve your lot, they know now, no matter what you do, personal contact, the loose social networks within a building or a system are the most efficient and effective ways to get to what you want to do. So I think that what is, people are making mistakes about assuming the metrics they're using is a good measure. And I go, it's an interesting measure that, general productivity, focus, blah, 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 but that's a given. I don't care where you do that. But if I'm running a business that sits in the cultural industries and sits in the experiential industries and sectors, then you are fucked if you're using that as a focus. You've got to think about. So I'll send the stuff when we've done it, because I think it's going to be fundamentally huge when you have to sit with somebody in your office going to say, well, Joe, I really would prefer to work from X because it's easier for me. That's fine. Do that, please. But let me explain the other bits to you, and then we can have the same debate. Sorry, Chris is tapping.
That's so good. I completely agree with you. I love it. Love it.
Well, we've got time to hear. We wonder what your question is that you'd like to ask us, and that we will then answer properly live next week. But I know that it's hard for you to join us because of the time zones, but
we had a couple. One of them was a bit tongue-in-cheek, which is, what is the future of futurology?
We get around to doing
That's
it.
a very good question.
but the other one we had was, and we've touched on it actually a bit in this discussion, which is the shift to digital as permanent as people are assuming? So you hear these quotes of, we've had 5 to 10 years of digital transition have happened in 6 months and so on. Or, on the flip side, has it just shown us how dismal a digital-only world is? And that as soon as people have the chance to get back into physical experiences, they will be doing so with gusto and enthusiasm like they've never had before because they've missed it so much.
We need to find a way to condense that.
Yes, it's been a bit of a long-winded one, but
and I think we should go with that one. Absolutely.
You might say that.
So we've sadly now got to say goodbye.
Yes.
So good to see you looking so fantastic. I know you've got to go because look, you've got a 7 o'clock and Chris is getting stressed.
Yeah, very good.
Ciao, ciao. Lots of love.
Ciao. Great chatting. Bye.
Bye.